We live in a world that constantly tells us, find someone, get married, settle down. That's the goal of life. And if you don't, people might look at you as if something's missing. But what if I told you that staying single, yes, choosing not to rush into relationships or even marriage, could actually be one of the smartest decisions you ever make? This isn't about rejecting love or companionship. It's about looking at life, psychology, and even our inner growth from another angle. And today, I want to explore this idea through the lens of Carl Jung's psychology, his insights into the self, individuation, and what it means to live a full, authentic life. So let's dive in. Main idea 1, the pressure of society versus the call of the self. From childhood, we're trained to believe in a life script. Go to school, find a job, get married, have kids, and repeat the cycle. That script works for some people, but not for everyone. And Jung, in his own way, argued that each of us carries a deeper calling, something unique that pushes us toward wholeness. Now, if we follow society blindly, we often end up living for others' approval instead of our own inner truth. Staying single, at least for a period of your life, can be a way of saying, wait, before I merge my path with someone else, let me first figure out who I really am. Think about it like this. If you don't know yourself deeply, how can you really share yourself authentically with another person? I've seen this with friends. Some rushed into marriage because that's what you're supposed to do at 25 or 30, and 5 years later, they're lost. Not because they're bad people, but because they never had the time to meet themselves first. Main idea 2, individuation, becoming whole. Here's where Jung's psychology becomes really interesting. He believed that the ultimate task of life is individuation, becoming whole, discovering the different parts of your personality and integrating them into one balanced self. But here's the catch. That process is deeply personal. You can't outsource it to a partner, nor can someone else do it for you. When you stay single, you create space to listen to yourself. You can explore your interests, your shadow side, your fears, your creativity, all without having to constantly negotiate with another person's needs or expectations. Let's make this practical. Imagine you're passionate about art, but your partner thinks it's a waste of time. If you're single, you can fully explore it, maybe even turn it into a career. If you're in a relationship where your passion isn't respected, you might suppress it. Over time, that suppression can turn into resentment or even depression. So being single isn't about loneliness. It can actually be about freedom. Freedom to discover who you are before blending with someone else. Main idea 3, the archetype of the hermit. Jung often spoke about archetypes, universal patterns of human behavior. One of them is the hermit, or the wise old man. This figure represents solitude, self-reflection, and inner wisdom. Now, does that mean we should all live in caves? Of course not. But it does suggest that solitude has an important role in human growth. Think about some of history's greatest thinkers, creators, or innovators. Many of them had long periods of solitude, whether by choice or circumstance. Nietzsche walked alone for hours. Thoreau lived alone at Walden Pond. Even Jung himself spent time in isolation at his famous tower in Bollingen, where he painted, carved, and reflected deeply. Solitude can feel scary in a society that glorifies constant connection, but often that's where the real breakthroughs happen. Everyday example: social media and relationships. Let's connect this to our everyday world. We live in the age of social media, where relationships are on display like products. Couple goals, wedding photos, engagement rings, they're everywhere. And it creates this subtle pressure. If I'm not in a relationship, I must be failing. But here's the twist. Many of those relationships online are curated illusions. Behind the smiles and filters, people may be struggling with the same insecurities as everyone else. When you choose to stay single consciously, you step outside of that pressure. You stop competing in a race that doesn't exist. Instead, you focus on building a relationship with yourself, the one person you'll actually spend your whole life with. Analytical comparison. Carl Jung versus modern culture. Now, if we compare Jung's insights to today's culture, we see a clash. Modern culture sells us the idea of completion through another person. You complete me. But Jung would probably argue, no, you're already complete. You just haven't realized it yet. This doesn't mean partnerships are bad. In fact, Jung believed relationships can be powerful mirrors, helping us see our own unconscious patterns. But if you enter a relationship without first doing inner work, you're likely projecting your shadow onto the other person. That's why so many relationships feel like a battlefield. People aren't really fighting each other, they're fighting the parts of themselves they haven't accepted yet. So staying single, at least for a time, allows you to face those shadows directly, rather than projecting them onto someone else. Personal reflection. I'll be honest with you. I used to think being single was a sign that something was wrong with me. You look around, everyone's posting anniversaries and couple selfies, and you start to feel behind. But the more I studied psychology, and the more I reflected on my own growth, I realized something powerful. Being single gave me the freedom to build myself. I had time to read, to work on my goals, to travel, to make mistakes without dragging someone else into the mess. It wasn't always easy, but it was meaningful. And now when I think about future relationships, I know I'll bring a stronger, more grounded version of myself to the table. Main idea number 4. The myth of happily ever after. Let's touch on another cultural myth. The idea that marriage or partnership guarantees happiness. Every romantic movie ends with the couple getting together, as if that's the final achievement. But what happens after the credits roll? Real life begins. Bills, arguments, differences, compromises. Jung's work reminds us that happiness doesn't come from fulfilling a script. It comes from inner alignment, knowing who you are, living authentically, and connecting to something larger than yourself. So if you stay single, you're not failing. You're actually giving yourself the chance to write your own script instead of blindly following one written for you. Main idea number 5. Projection. The hidden trap in relationships. One of Jung's most famous insights is the idea of projection. In simple terms, projection means that we see in others what we cannot see in ourselves. Here's how it works. Imagine you meet someone and instantly they feel magical, almost too perfect. You're convinced you found the one. But often what's happening is that you've projected your own hidden qualities onto them. For example, maybe you've buried your own creativity and suddenly you're deeply attracted to someone artistic. Or maybe you've denied your own ambition and you fall for someone highly driven. It feels like they complete you, but in reality, you're seeing a reflection of your own unfinished business. Now, here's the problem. Once the projection fades, as it always does, you're left facing the real person, all flaws and all. That's when many relationships crash. So why is staying single powerful here? Because it forces you to face your own projections directly. Instead of chasing someone to complete you, you begin the work of completing yourself. Everyday example, the rebound relationship. Have you ever noticed how some people jump from one relationship to another without taking a break? They can't stand being single. They need someone, anyone, to fill that gap. What's happening here is projection on overdrive. Instead of looking inward and asking, why do I feel empty? What am I avoiding? They throw themselves into another relationship, hoping it'll solve the problem. But staying single, even when it's uncomfortable, is like holding a mirror up to yourself. It's painful at times, yes, but it's also the path to genuine growth. Main idea number 6, the shadow, facing the dark side. Another crucial concept in Jung's psychology is the shadow. This is the part of ourselves we deny, repress, or refuse to acknowledge. Think about it. Maybe you see yourself as a kind, gentle person. But deep down, you also carry anger, jealousy, selfishness, all the messy human stuff. And instead of admitting it, you might project it onto others. Like, that person is toxic. But really, you're just avoiding your own shadow. Here's the link to staying single. When you're alone, you can't escape yourself. The silence forces you to meet your and though it's uncomfortable, that confrontation is what makes you stronger and more balanced. In relationships, the shadow often shows up as constant arguments. You blame your partner, they blame you, but really, both are wrestling with their own denied parts. If you haven't done shadow work, your partner becomes the punching bag for everything you can't face within yourself. So staying single, even temporarily, gives you the training ground to face your shadow without dragging someone else into the battlefield. Cultural comparison. Western romance versus Jungian growth. Culturally, we're told to find our better half, but Jung's perspective suggests you're already a whole person. You just need to integrate your light and dark sides. In Western culture, romantic love is often idealized as salvation. The lonely soul finds its soulmate and all is well. But Jung's psychology shows us that salvation doesn't come from another person. It comes from doing the inner work, individuation. That's why many people, after years of chasing relationships, suddenly discover peace when they finally spend time alone. They realize that solitude isn't emptiness. It's a chance to finally meet the parts of themselves they've been running from. Personal reflection. I remember a phase in my own life where I avoided being alone. I filled my time with friendships, dates, endless distractions, anything but silence, because silence was uncomfortable. But when I finally sat with it, when I allowed myself to be single and alone for a while, I discovered layers of myself I never knew. I saw insecurities, but also hidden strengths. And I can honestly say that period of solitude gave me more confidence and peace than any relationship ever had. It's not that relationships are bad, it's that without self-knowledge, they can turn into escapes instead of true connections. Main idea 7. The role of archetypes in love. Let's bring back the idea of archetypes. Jung believed that deep in our unconscious we carry universal patterns, the hero, the mother, the shadow, and so on. In relationships, two archetypes often show up strongly: the anima, the feminine side within men, and the animus, the masculine side within women. According to Jung, we're often drawn to partners who represent our inner opposite, the qualities we're missing in ourselves. But here's the tricky part. If you haven't integrated those qualities within yourself, you'll desperately seek them in others. That's why some men are fascinated by mysterious, emotional women. They're chasing their own unacknowledged sensitivity. Or why some women fall for bold, assertive men. They're chasing their own unexpressed strength. When you're single, you get the chance to explore and integrate those qualities consciously. Instead of needing someone else to carry them for you, you begin to balance them inside yourself. And when you eventually do enter a relationship, it's no longer from a place of desperation. It's from wholeness. Everyday example. Choosing out of wholeness. Think about two scenarios. In the first, someone feels empty and unloved. They rush into a relationship because they can't stand loneliness. They cling to their partner, demand constant reassurance, and fear abandonment. That's not love, that's dependency. In the second, someone feels whole and grounded. They've explored their own interests, faced their shadow, and know their value. When they choose a partner, it's not out of need, it's out of desire to share their already full life. Which scenario do you think leads to a healthier, longer-lasting relationship? Obviously the second. And that's why staying single, at least long enough to build wholeness, is so valuable. Analytical comparison. Jung versus other thinkers. Let's bring in a quick comparison. Freud, Jung's mentor turned rival, believed much of human desire comes from repressed sexuality. For Freud, relationships and attraction were deeply tied to unconscious drives for pleasure and reproduction. Jung, however, widened the lens. He saw relationships not just as sexual, but as symbolic, expressions of archetypes, projections, and opportunities for self-growth. So while Freud might say, you're single because you're repressing desire, Jung might say, you're single because your psyche is pushing you to grow before merging with someone else. I personally find Jung's view more empowering. It turns singleness into a stage of growth, not a problem to be fixed. Main idea 8. Solitude as strength. In our culture, solitude is often mistaken for weakness. People pity the single person eating alone at a cafe, or they wonder what's wrong with the friend who never marries. But from a Jungian lens, solitude is not weakness, it's strength. Because it takes courage to be alone with yourself. It takes resilience to sit with your thoughts without distraction. And here's the paradox. The people most comfortable being alone often have the healthiest relationships later. Why? Because they're not entering relationships from fear or dependency. They're entering from choice. Personal story example. The travel phase. Let me give you a small personal story. A few years ago, I traveled alone for the first time. At first, it was scary. No one to share meals with, no one to talk to at night. But after a week, I started to love it. I discovered how independent I could be, how much I enjoyed making my own decisions, and how many interesting people I could meet without the safety net of a partner. That trip taught me more about myself than any relationship ever had. It showed me that solitude can be an adventure, not a punishment. And that mindset completely changed the way I view singleness today. Main idea 9. Singleness and creativity. Here's something fascinating about staying single. It often unleashes creativity. When you're not tied to constant relationship obligations, compromises, family duties, endless negotiations, you suddenly have more time and mental space. And that space is golden. Jung himself experienced this. After his break with Freud, he went through a period of isolation that was emotionally painful. But during that time, he created some of his most groundbreaking ideas. Concepts like the collective unconscious, archetypes, and active imagination. Now let's translate that into everyday life. Maybe you've always wanted to write a book, start a business, learn an instrument, or dive into a passion project. Being single gives you the freedom to pour your energy into those things without distraction. This doesn't mean relationships kill creativity, but let's be honest, relationships require time and compromise. When you're single, you can invest fully in your own projects, and that often leads to breakthroughs you wouldn't have discovered otherwise. Everyday example. The side hustle. Imagine two people. Person A is in a demanding relationship where evenings are spent compromising on what to watch, who to visit, and how to spend weekends. Person B is single, and every evening they dedicate 2 hours to building a side hustle they love. 5 years later, Person A might have stability, but also regret for not pursuing personal dreams. Person B might have built a thriving business or a skill set that completely changes their life. That's the hidden advantage of singleness. It can be a launch pad for purpose. Main idea 10. Balance between solitude and connection. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not saying staying single forever is the only path. Humans are social creatures, and relationships, whether romantic, familial, or friendships, are vital to our well-being. But the key is balance. Jung's idea of individuation teaches us that growth comes from holding opposites together. Solitude and connection aren't enemies, they're complementary. Too much isolation can turn into loneliness. Too much dependency can suffocate individuality. The sweet spot is when you learn to be whole on your own, and then you choose relationships freely, not out of fear, not out of pressure, but out of genuine connection. So staying single isn't about rejecting love, It's about building a solid foundation so that when love does come, it doesn't drown you, it enriches you. Cultural reflection. The modern shift. Interestingly, modern culture is slowly catching up to this idea. We see more people embracing single lifestyles, whether through choosing not to marry, delaying marriage, or focusing on personal growth. In some cultures, this is still taboo. The unmarried person over 30 might be seen as incomplete. But from a Jungian perspective, they might actually be ahead of the curve, because they're listening to their inner self instead of blindly obeying tradition. Personally, I think this cultural shift is healthy. It allows people to live authentically, not just according to social scripts. And in the long run, that authenticity leads to deeper, more meaningful connections. Main idea 11. Spiritual growth in solitude. Let's take it one step deeper. For Jung, psychology wasn't just about the mind. It was also about the soul. He believed that individuation is, at its core, a spiritual journey. Solitude often becomes the ground where spiritual growth happens. Without constant noise and distraction, we start asking bigger questions. Who am I? What's my purpose? What do I believe in? Many spiritual traditions recognize this. Monks, mystics, and sages across cultures often spend time in solitude, not because they hate people, but because silence allows them to hear truths that busyness hides. So in that sense, staying single, whether for a season or for life, can be a deeply spiritual choice. It gives you the space to connect with something larger than yourself. I can tell you from my own life, there are nights when I sit alone. No TV, no phone, just a notebook in my thoughts. And honestly, those nights bring me more peace than any noisy party or shallow date ever has. In those moments, I feel like I touch something deeper, something that reminds me I'm not missing out. I'm actually gaining clarity, and that clarity makes me stronger, happier, and more ready for whatever the future brings. 12. Choosing singleness consciously. There's a huge difference between being single by accident and being single by choice. If you're single and miserable, constantly wishing for someone to save you, then singleness feels like a prison. But if you consciously choose it, if you say, I value this stage because it's helping me grow, then singleness becomes freedom. Carl Jung's psychology helps us reframe singleness from failure into opportunity. It's not about what you lack, it's about what you're building. Everyday example. The friend who waits. We all know someone who refuses to settle. Maybe they're in their 30s or 40s, and people whisper, why aren't they married yet? But if you look closer, you'll see they're thriving, building careers, exploring passions, traveling, growing as individuals. When they eventually do meet someone, it's not out of desperation, it's out of strength. And that's the kind of love that lasts. So why could staying single be the smartest choice? Because it gives you the chance to escape societal pressure and discover your true path, work on individuation, becoming whole on your own, face your shadow instead of projecting it onto others, develop creativity, purpose, and spiritual depth, enter future relationships from strength, not need. In the end, staying single isn't about rejecting love. It's about building a stronger foundation for whatever love and life will bring you. Now, let me ask you, do you think staying single has made you stronger, or do you feel it's holding you back? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. And if you enjoyed this exploration of Jungian psychology and everyday life, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. Thanks for watching, and remember, wholeness starts within.